The next bit for this, the system of morality has to cast judgment on the totality of human action, right? And that's where I had the parentheses over the population, right? And we know that, right? What you must do, what you ought to do. This is the whole point. We went into judgment and all that last time, so I'm not going to get into too much discussion on that because we should be sort of comfortable with that discourse now. The system of morality has to cast, it's obligated, the system itself is constructed to, is designed, to be technical, to cast judgment on the totality of human action. Those actions conforming to the imperative are good, and those that do not are evil, and hence the idea of evil. This is going to be important before, right? So we have our moral imperative, we have our system, and the system says that you guys must do X. So the system wants to see X. For this guy who does X, his actions conform and thus are good. For this guy who doesn't do X, his actions do not conform and are evil. So that the idea of sort of moral evil comes, and there are many different, well, not many, but there are a few versions of evil, depending on who you look at. But the idea of moral evil, evil that is based in human intent, human action, and that combination, which is actually really complicated, is contingent on failing to conform to some moral imperative, some standard. You ought to do X, you do not do X. Because you knew you should have done X and you did otherwise, your actions do not conform, and thus I, the member of the priesthood class, am justified in condemning your action. And later what we'll see is not only am I justified in condemning the action, I can take it a step further. I can increase the lie, if you will, and condemn the individual who performed the action. And Nietzsche will talk about this later in a fabulous passage on murder, on stabbing someone to death. But I don't want to jump ahead. Okay, so that's number 3. Okay, that should be clear. Number 4. They can, quote, prescribe a large number of things, only they must not point to experience or empiricism. I just read that passage, right? The moral prescriptions ought and must point to a system that governs action. And we've seen this time and time again, right? The first time we saw this was in Note 12b, right? The whole point of this is to govern action. It's a system of control, right? System must govern, right? The system is used to govern your action. What we'll see later is a very sort of, if you want to use the word evil loosely, a more sinister individual, a more sinister philosopher, priest, a more sinister priest can impose a system of morality, of belief, of reason, of justification on a population, knowing that he or she will not conform to that system because I stand outside of the system. The system is constructed to govern them, not me, right? This is the idea of being above the law. Right? I'm sure you guys have heard, so to keep it ghetto for a second, you guys have heard the phrase above the law. I think even Steven Seagal might have had a really cheesy karate flick called Above the Law. And the idea of being above the law is just that, right? We have the law, and the law is used to control, right, to govern the population, right? It's a system of government, right? So the law is used to govern the population. But they're architects of the law, right? They're designers of the law. And since I've designed the law, I'm not talking about contemporary American or sort of legal politics, right? Obviously we know that people conform to the law. We hope, we want to believe that. But they're architects of the law. And insofar as I'm an architect of the law, I create the law in such a manner that that law will govern and justify my intent, what it is that I want. A perfect example of this, there's tons of stuff that has been written on this. I think I might have even touched on it in my discussion of theories when I got to colonialism, post-colonialism, and so on. In colonialism, obviously, the idea of imperialism, specifically British imperialism, is based on the fact that one of the ideas with respect to land ownership, where no land has been claimed by a foreign government, it is rightfully the land of the Queen, right? So I go to some indigenous population, they don't have a specified form of government, it's more egalitarian. I say that this land is unclaimed, I claim the land for the Queen, I impose my law, and then I control the population, I enslave them, and so on, right? I've constructed a system, I've constructed a legal system to control the population. Chinua Achebe says it he says it perfectly. Something along the lines of when a white man brings his, or he might say something more general, I forget exactly how it goes, when they bring their belief, their religion, their legal system quickly follows. Something along those lines. I forget the direct quote. But the idea is, when they bring their religion, belief, right after they bring their religion, after they bring once they initiate proselytization, what's going to follow immediately is the political and legal system, right? The architects of the legal system stand outside of that legal system and use that system to control a population of people. So that should be clear now. Okay, so right, number 5. It is from these similarities that the notion of good and evil arise, right? It's from these similarities that the notion of good and evil arise. And I want to actually read this bit. Hold on, did I get to consciousness? Yeah. Okay. So it's from this system that the notion of good and evil. It's from this system that the notion of good and evil arise. Now this is where I think Nietzsche is super underrated, because he makes what I think is one of the top 5 best philosophical moves, and nobody seems to really give him a lot of credit for it, right? So for me, I'm going to spend a little bit more time than I probably should spend on this point. This is in sort of the middle end of note 141. Absolutely tremendous. It's like up there with the Copernican revolution level of idea. Nietzsche looks at this system and recognizes. Now, you know, for those of you who know Nietzsche really well, I encourage you, if you're still watching the videos at this point, to leave some notes and tell me what you think on this. But I think this is a profoundly deep concept, right? Nietzsche recognizes that I have everything I need here to then create, right? To create, this is important, to create the notion of consciousness. Up until this point, it seems, and especially after I read this, that Nietzsche is basically saying, and I could be wrong, that consciousness isn't necessarily this biological fact of human existence. It's not a physiological, it's not a determined consequence of our biology, but this idea of human consciousness is a product, maybe the last residual product of this system of conditioning the human mind. This is, I can't explain, if I am right in my interpretation, how important this is, right? Especially for contemporary scientists looking into consciousness. I think Nietzsche would say, stop doing what you're doing, you're wasting your time, right? It's the last remnant of the hold of Christianity on, that sounds a little harsh, but the idea of the discourse of consciousness is the last hold. I think Nietzsche would say this, of Christian methodology, not just on the philosopher class as we saw earlier, but on the scientific class, right? You guys are still looking for consciousness, and it's something that the priest created. I mean, that's profoundly heavy. The impact is huge. Let's read this, because I don't want it just to be me. I want you to see it in the text, right? Okay, he says, this is note 141, and it's, you know, to give you an idea, there's like, he has like in parentheses 1, in parentheses 2, in parentheses, it's close to that, right? He says, in this way, actually let me read a little bit before that, so I get the whole vibe.